Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to make a real-time slider in Rive and how it connects directly to an animation. Alright, so to get started with this demo, we are going to start by creating the animation that we want to control with the slider. This can be any animation you want. You can import an animation, you can create one from scratch. In this case, I'm going to create one from scratch and keep it relatively simple just to show that, and then we'll get into the slider build. So I'm going to start by generating just a simple ellipse. I'm going to center this up. I'm going to get rid of the fill. I'm going to add a stroke and give it a weight of about 4 so we can see it. And then I'm going to go into the trim paths and add a sequential trim paths. And then all we're going to be doing is animating the end percentage to make it go from 0 to 100%. I'm going to keep it on 0. And then we're going to go into the Animate tab, go to our timeline. I'm going to rename this to Circle Animation. And again, this can be as long as you want or as short as you want. In this case, I'm just going to keep it at the default 1 second. I'm going to go and add a 0 keyframe at the 0 second mark. And at the 1 second mark, I am going to get to 100. And that is our animation, a simple little linear animation on the trim paths. All right, next, we are going to start to design the general UI for this slider. We're going to keep it relatively simple. Again, you can get as detailed as you want with this, but we're going to start with a rectangle and just make this like this. We can get really specific here in a moment. I'm going to give it a height of 4 pixels. I'm going to give it a width of 450 pixels, or 400 pixels, I'm sorry. And we are going to keep it right there for now. Let's make it white just so it's easier to see. And then I'm also going to make another ellipse, and then we can make this a little bit tinier. We'll go 30, and then we are going to put this right at the edge of our rectangle there. So ultimately, you can see this is going to be a slider. We're going to click on this and drag it over. I'm also going to make this white just so it's consistent. We're going to group these together. So I'm going to take the rectangle first, make it a group. I'm going to also call the ellipse, I'm going to call it a button. And I'm going to throw that in here as well. And this is going to be called slider. And then everything's squared out. We're going to bring this down to the 450 mark, just so it's a little bit easier, and just so we can see to make sure that our trim path is in. Yep, that's all squared up and good to know. I'm also going to take the ellipse animation, and I'm going to put that. Oops, I'm going to put that into an animation. Circle animation, and staying organized. Okay, so the next part of this demo is to make our hitboxes. The hitboxes are going to be a detecting hitbox and a tracking hitbox. They're going to be the hitboxes that are going to control and the details on how we can actually move this slider. So we're going to start with just a simple rectangle. Now our ellipse is 30 by 30, so we're actually going to keep that relatively consistent. So we're going to make this square 30 pixels by 30 pixels, and I like to make my hitboxes funky colors just so it's easier to see. And we're going to call this one detecting, and then we're going to duplicate that, Control D. Let's just move this over so we can see it. We're going to make this a completely different color, like pink or something, and we're going to call this tracking. We're going to zero these out for the time being, just keeps things easy. These will line up with the slider later, and then we're going to group these together. We're going to call this group hitboxes. All right, we can minimize this for now, or hide it for now, and then we're going to go into making the joystick next. All right, so joysticks are cool. They ultimately are some additional user interface content within Rive that you can assign animations to and control a bunch of details. In this case, we're creating more of a horizontal-based joystick because we're actually controlling the horizontal movement. You can do this in a square format, a rectangular format, or vertical. In this case, you can control all those details here. But we're going to make this, we're going to just say draw in world space, and that's going to keep things consistent with the pixel dimensions of our comp. And because our slider rectangle was 450 pixels wide, we're going to keep that consistent with this as well. So we're going to make this 450 pixels wide, and we're going to make this, let's just say 4. I think there's a smaller default, or it defaults to like 10 or something. And then we are going to center this up. We know that this is a 500 by 500 comp, so we're going to put 250 in the middle. And again, it really doesn't matter where it's at, but we're going to put it at 550 is probably pretty good. And again, we just want to make sure that it's underneath. The way that joysticks work is that you can control an animation in a timeline to have the ability to animate, when you want and control how you put your keyframes. But in this case, we're going to be actually tying hitboxes and listeners to the joystick, giving us the ability to, at runtime, control the UI, and it will move the joystick in real time. To do that, first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the x-axis, and we're going to assign the animation to it. So we're going to say circle animation, and I can show this and demo this off. Now the way that joysticks work, you'll notice that it's in the middle, and you'll notice that the handle percentage is 0. The way that joysticks work is they have a percentage negative and a positive percentage. This will go all the way from negative 100%, in which case now it lives on the far left, and then if you go at 100%, it lives on the far right. We're going to default this to negative 100%. That's where our joystick's default value will be. Oh, and I forgot that this is actually a 400 long rectangle. So now it matches up perfectly. And then now, if I were to test this out, this is just for testing purposes. We're going to take this timeline, and we're going to take the joystick, and I'm going to set a keyframe. Actually, I don't even have to do that. I can just go down here, and I can toggle this. You notice that it's already drawing the circle because it's tied to that. Now, again, this would be great for just, messing around with animations and setting up your keyframes, but we're going to take it a step further. So we don't need this animation anymore, so we can get rid of that. Let's go back into the design. Okay, next we are going to create our inputs and our listeners. So we're going to go into the animate tab, and we are going to go to our state machine. We're going to get into the details of how the state machine is actually set up. We're actually going to get rid of the circle animation because we don't even want the state machine at the moment, but we do want the listeners and the inputs. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make an input, and we're going to use a Boolean input. Boolean input is a true or false statement, and in this case we're going to have a true and false statement in regards to whether or not it is dragging, and that's going to be based on the fact that our mouse is going to be dragging along the hitbox. So we're going to name this Boolean is dragging, and then next we're going to start creating our listeners. We're actually going to be creating 3 different listeners. We're going to turn on our hitboxes. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select the tracking hitbox. That is the pink one. And I'm going to make a listener. And I'm just going to tap the plus sign there. And it's going to create a listener called tracking. I'm going to take the detecting next. We can hide this just to see it. But we're going to take the detecting. And we're going to create a hitbox. Or I'm sorry, a listener. And we're going to rename this detecting 1. And then we're going to make another one. And we're going to call it detecting 2, and I'll explain this a little bit as we go. And again, because we're going to make sure that the Boolean is actually true for both the tracking and the detecting 1, and then it's going to be false for the detecting 2. That is going to give us the feedback in real time to click, hold, and drag. So now we're going to connect the listeners to the input. So we're going to select the tracking listener first. And we're going to go to, it's already set to the tracking hitbox, and instead of pointer enter, we want to change it to pointer move. That means that when we're moving the pointer, and as long as we're in that hitbox, and the hitbox is live, it will move along with it. And we're going to say, set the input to is dragging, set it to true. And this is one of the most important parts of this entire thing because it will not work if you don't do this. There's this little plus sign here, and this plus sign is going to give you the option to do an input change or to align target. We're going to say align target, and we are going to align this to the hitboxes group. So now that I've clicked this, it's live and it's saying please pick a target, and you're going to click the hitboxes group. Now the tracking listener on pointer move will make is dragging true and will align to the hitboxes. Next, we're going to take detecting listener 1, and we're going to go to the drop down. Again, it's on the detecting hitbox, and we're going to say pointer down. We're going to change the input to is dragging, and it's going to be true. So now when we click that hitbox, is dragging will be true. We're going to do the same thing, but then we're going to switch the set. We're going to go to detecting 2, and we're going to say pointer up, and we're going to say is dragging is false. So now when we select, or when we have the pointer over the hitbox and we press down, is dragging will be true, and when we let go, is dragging will be false. And then because we tied tracking to also say when is dragging is true, when we click and drag, the tracking will come with it. That's the logic behind this whole thing. All right, the next part is going to be setting up a couple animations that are going to help this whole thing kind of work together. They actually are really, really simple. There are single keyframes, so you don't even have to worry about anything kind of crazy. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a new animation, new timeline, and we're going to call this tracking. And we are going to take the tracking hitbox, and we are going to adjust the scale. So ultimately, we're going to be playing with this. We could use position if we wanted to, but ultimately we want to make it so the hitbox for tracking is available or visible, or at least big enough for us to hold and drag when we want it to. And when we're not using it, it's going to be almost invisible, if not nothing. And that's where we're only going to be messing with the scale value, and I'll kind of explain. So in this case, with this one, this is going to be like tracking is live, and we're going to set the scale to 200%, which is going to make that square obviously bigger. But that's the only keyframe we're going to put in here. We're literally just going to say that when tracking is live, 200%. Then we're going to make a new animation, new timeline, and we're going to call this detecting. So ultimately, this is just when we're waiting for the tracking to become live, and we're going to take the tracking hitbox, and we're going to set its scale to 0. So during this part of the animation, the tracking will be set to 0, and now we won't be able to see it, interact with it at all. Only when we click, when is dragging now becomes true, will tracking become available. Okay, the next part of this is to set up constraints. Constraints are interesting. They're ultimately a series of rules and parameters that kind of lock specific pieces of artwork in your artboard to either parameters that you have set, whether they're pixel values or rotational values, or you can even constrain them to other objects in your actual scene or in your hierarchy. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our joystick, and we already tied the x-axis to the circle animation, but we are going to change the handle source. The handle source we are going to align to the button UI. Now you notice the joystick has this white dot over here, which we can freely control like we did earlier, but when we take the handle source, we get this live select target option, and we're going to click the button layer. And you'll notice that now that joystick circle turns gray, because now whenever we move this slider either live or in a timeline or whatnot, it will also move the joystick, allowing the animation to move. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that hitbox group, and we're going to move it directly on top of the slider circle. So if we go into the button, we are at a -200 and 0. But the group also has a position of 250 and 450, so the hitbox will not necessarily line up from the position pixel dimensions. It's going to be its own. And you'll notice that this is a 500 by 500 comp. So what this means is on the x-axis we are 50 pixels in, And on the y-axis, we are 450 pixels vertically down. So this is important because this is going to make constraints a lot easier to understand. So then we're going to take the button layer and we're going to give it a constraint. The constraint is on the right side. We're going to add a constraint, and we're going to add a translation constraint. That is obviously a movement-based constraint based on pixel dimensions. We're going to go open up the settings tab here, and we're going to set the target to the hitbox's group. So now whenever the hitbox's group moves, that slider will also move with it. So let's do that. We can actually see that by, let's turn off the actual hitboxes, and we're going to grab this group, and if we were to move this group, that slider button is now coming with it. That's exactly what we want, but we do want to keep that hitboxes where it is. We're going to go back into the button constraints here, and we're going to make sure that copy X and copy Y are checked. Now this is true by default, but you just want to make sure that you don't change this, because this ensures that this will follow the hitbox on a pixel by pixel level. You can adjust these values so it can be like offset, or you can create your own set of values, but then it will be off and not following it on a pixel level. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to the hitbox itself, and we're going to add a constraint to it, because we don't want the hitbox to go past the edge of the rectangle UI on the left, and we don't want it to go farther on the right, and we definitely don't want it to move vertically up and down. So now that we have the hitboxes selected, we're going to add a constraint. We're going to add a translation constraint. We're going to open this up, and we don't want to select a target because we do want it to be its own free thing, but instead we're going to uncheck copy X and copy Y. We're going to set the X minimum to be 50, because that's where it currently is, 50 pixels on the X, and the maximum to be 40, or 450, I'm so sorry. So that way, when we move it over 450 pixels, if we were to go 451, it would not move past the 450. And then on the Y, we're going to say that the minimum and the maximum are both going to be checked, but they're both going to be 450, because we want that to not move vertically from the 450 pixel mark on the Y. So now, when we move this, we can go to the hitboxes. Now, if we're currently at 50 and 450, if we were to click this and drag to the left, it will not move. It will not go past. And you notice in the top right corner, we got negative 260, negative 300, but it's not physically going anywhere. That's because it's constrained to that 50 pixel area. But if we click and drag it, we can go right all on the slider, and we then can't go past that 450 mark. This is exactly how constraints are supposed to work. So now the slider button is tied to the hitbox, and the hitbox has a constraint to not go past the slider UI. Okay, so the final part of this is to set up our state machine. The state machine will then give us the functionality to work with this content live and allow the tracking and the dragging hitboxes to work appropriately. We're going to bring those tracking and detecting hitboxes visible again. And we're going to go into the state machine. And this is going to be a relatively easy state machine to follow. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in both the tracking and the detecting animations. Now, off the rip, we're going to make entry go into detecting. And this is going to be true the whole time. It's going to be the thing that starts it off. And then we're going to pipe in detecting into tracking, but this is going to be when is dragging is set to true. So when the Boolean is true based on the hitboxes being selected, tracking will be true. Now, this would be done, but we need to go back to the detecting when dragging is false. So we're going to take a connector from tracking back to detecting. And we're going to say that when the condition is dragging is false, we go back to detecting. So we're going to start this off. So we're going to hit the play button. And when we are doing nothing, detecting is true, and we're going to get that green detecting box. And again, our tracking, based on the animation, our tracking scale is currently set to 0. But when we bring that over and we click, now our tracking scale is set to 200%, and tracking is set to true. If I release the mouse button, it will go back to that detecting state. This is exactly what we're looking for. Now the cool thing is that because the detecting and the tracking hitboxes are in the hitboxes group, and the hitbox is constrained to this, we can move this in real time. So we're going to click and drag, and look at that, it's dragging on our animation in real time because the hitboxes are constrained to the UI. The button, which is currently underneath those hitboxes, is constrained to the hitbox, and the button and the joystick are working together to draw on that animation. So we can actually turn off the hitboxes here, and as long as we keep the hitbox group live, we can then, those things will still be live in real time. So now we can just click, and now again, tracking is live. You can see the state machine, tracking is live, and we can drag this on, and we can paint on our animation in real time. So this is really, really effective for a lot of different ways. Clearly you can have a lot of real-time running animations, whether they're in a browser or on a website or something along those lines, but this has a lot of practical applications for interactive content in a variety of different media, whether it's games or browsing websites or whatever the situation is. Has a lot of really, really cool ways you can use it when you're visualizing 3D products, doing 360s of vehicles or products or whatever the situation is. So lots of great ways to use sliders, and of course you can make the UI itself as complex or as simple as you want. You can add a hover states and press states, and clearly you can tie this to any type of animation. What I would do is, now that you've created this, I would save this as a template in your drafts, and then as long as you can bring in any animation you want, and then in your joystick you would then just change the animation from circle animation to another animation you've created. Again, this gives you lots of flexibility. You will, if you change up your artboard size, some of your values may change for your joysticks and your hitboxes and stuff, so just be careful of that. You may need to do some adjusting there, but again, that's just based on what your constraints are set up at. But again, this is it's pretty straightforward at that point. So kind of a lot of setup, kind of a little bit of a slow burn there, but it literally, as soon as everything lines up, it just works no problem. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.